Senate will please come to order. The Senate will please come to order. All those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber. With those on the floor and our guest in the gallery, please rise as we are led in prayer this morning by the Reverend Tom Bias. He's a retired United Methodist clergy in Madison, West Virginia. And then please remain standing as we are led in the pledge this morning by the Senator from Marshall. Reverend Bias.
Our most righteous and loving Heavenly Father, we hear the words of the prophet Jeremiah. Were it not for the mercies of God, we would be consumed. But his compassions fail not. New every day are the mercies of God. Great is thy faithfulness. We come before you, O Lord, with an attitude of gratitude for your love and for your mercy. These men and women of the West Virginia Senate are your humble servants. They come before you today in need of hope. When they feel helpless, give them blessed assurance. When they feel weak, remind them that great is thy faithfulness. When they feel discouraged, put a new song in their hearts. We pray for a spirit of cooperation and hope to fill their hearts. Hope for a better and brighter and future for our people. Hope for a better life. Hope for communities of love and kindness. We place our hope and our future in their hands. Sanctify now, O Lord, the hearts and minds of these men and women of the West Virginia Senate for your service and for the service of your people. Bind their hearts and minds together as they work side by side to develop a vision for the people of West Virginia. Write your perfect law of love on their hearts and upon the hearts of the people as we enter into covenant with one another. In the name of Christ our Lord, we pray and ask. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Bias. The Senator from Marshall County.
Members and guests, please join me in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The reading of the journal.
West Virginia Legislature, Senate Journal, January 19th, 2018. The
Senator from Marion requests unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Introduction of guests. On behalf of the Senate, it is my pleasure to welcome our honorary pages for the day. Please stand and be recognized as your name is called. As guest is the Senator from Putnam. We have Emily Martin. As guests of the Senator from Wyoming, we have Chase Brown, Chloe Cook, Madison Kennedy, and Cassandra Stover. If they would all please rise and the Senate give them a warm welcome. Further introductions. The Senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our doc for the day, Dr. Audrey Plummer of Huntington, West Virginia. If she would stand and the Senate make her welcome.
Further introductions. The Senator from Wetzel County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very pleased today to have some members of the New Martinsville City Council here with us today. In the gallery to my right, we have three council people, Diener Isaacs, Holly Grandstaff, and Mr. Joel Potts. Will they please stand, along with our city recorder, Bonnie Shannon. She has been in that job for 25 years. And I'll tell you, these people that work on city council and these recorder jobs, we think we've got it rough. I'll tell you, they've got it tough. Please make them welcome.
The junior senator from Putnam County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today in the North Gallery are a group of ladies from my alma mater, Winfield High School, led by their teacher, Kelsey Spang. If they would rise and the Senate make them welcome.
Further introductions, the senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the senator from Logan, we're very pleased to have accompanying Reverend Tom Bias, his lovely wife, Nancy Bias, seated in the rear gallery. If she'd stand, the Senate make her welcome. Further, Mr. President, Municipal League Day, of course, and I'm very pleased to have, on behalf of the Senator from Logan again, the Mayor of Logan, Serafino Noletti, the Mayor of MANN, Jim Blevins, Logan City Clerk, Amber Miller-Vyers, and Danville Town Manager, John Paul Abbott. If they would all stand, and the Senate make them welcome.
The Senator from Greenbrier County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm privileged to have with us today, and I'd like to introduce on behalf of the Senator from Monroe and I, the Mayor and Recorder of America's coolest small town, Lewisburg, Mayor John Manchester and Recorder Shannon Beatty. Will the Senate please make them feel welcome?
The Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. To celebrate Women's and Girls Day at the Legislature today, we have many guests in the gallery. If they could stand and we make them feel welcome.
The Senator from Braxton County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today is Women and Girls Day at West Virginia Legislatures, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome a special young lady from Gilmer County who's a member of the Girl Scout Troop 32394 in the Black Diamond Council. I want to thank Clarissa Thorne for taking the time to be a proactive and young girl, encouraging her to stay involved in our state government, perhaps run for office. I'm not sure which gallery that she's in, but would Clarissa and her scout leader, Larissa Fox, please stand and the Senate make them welcome.
The Senior Senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the senators from the 15th, as well as the Senator from Jefferson, we're very pleased to have some of the leaders from Berkeley County here today. We're going to be honoring Leadership Berkeley, and they're in the South Gallery, so if they would please stand and receive a warm Senate welcome.
The Senator from Wood County.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're honored to have City Councilman from Parkersburg on behalf of the Senior Senator from the 3rd and I, Eric Barber. I'm not sure where Eric is sitting. There you are, and good to have Eric Barber with us. Honored to have you, my friend, and if the Senate would make him feel welcome.
Further introductions, the Senator from Preston County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seated in the West Gallery is Michelle Harshberger from the Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership of West Virginia. Would you please stand and the Senate make you welcome?
The Junior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you again, Mr. President. In the North Gallery is Steve Martin, the father of our page for the day, Emily Martin. If he would rise and the Senate make him welcome.
Further introductions. Communications from the House.
The Clerk of the House announced the passage by that body of engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 4020, making technical corrections in the code when referencing Chapter 49.
Message will be received and referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
That's all I have.
Communications from the Executive.
There are none.
Reports from standing committees.
Your Committee on Energy, Industry, and Mining has had under consideration Senate Bill 290 relating to DEP standards of water quality and effluent limitations, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. Respectfully submitted, Randy E. Smith, Chair.
Report will be received, and under the bill's original double committee reference will be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
That's all I have.
Reports from select committees.
There are none.
Introduction of bills. The Senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Requesting unanimous consent that Senate Bill number 334 through Senate Bill number 338 be considered and introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system.
The senator from Ohio requests unanimous consent that Senate Bill number 334 through Senate Bill number 338 be considered and introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? The chair hears none. So ordered. Resolutions.
Senate Resolution 12 by Senators Palumbo, Trump, Stallings, Beach, and Klein designating January 22nd, 2018 as Women's and Girls Day.
The senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the resolution for Women's and Girls Day at the Legislature. Obviously, throughout our history, women...
The senior senator from the 17th requests unanimous consent that resolution be taken up for immediate consideration, committee reference be dispensed with, and resolution be placed upon its adoption. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The clerk will read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 12 designating January 22nd, 2018 as Women's and Girls Day at the Legislature.
Question for the Senate is adoption of resolution. Is there discussion? The senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the resolution for Women's and Girls Day in the Legislature. Obviously, women have had a tremendous impact at our state, our nation, and our world throughout the history of the world. Particularly in West Virginia, Minnie Buckingham Harper, as the first African-American woman to serve in a legislative body in the United States when she was appointed to the House of Delegates in West Virginia in 1928. Mary Lou Retton was the first American woman to win the all-around gold medal at the Olympics. And Katherine Johnson, a pioneer in the American space history, are just a few of the women who've made remarkable note in not only our state, our nation, but in the world. We've got a lot of talent in this state that we need to continue to promote and encourage. Unfortunately, in the Senate, we only have 3 women here. It'd be nice to have many more than 3 women in the Senate, and hopefully after the next election, maybe we will. So I urge adoption of the resolution.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Not. The question before the Senate is adoption resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the resolution adopted. The senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting a resolution.
The senator from Ohio moves that the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting this resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the Senate in brief recess to present this resolution.
Gonna stand down there. Scatterday texted me and said that she's in the gallery. But I don't see her. Yeah. You know, I didn't even hear from Wheeling. She texted me and said she was in the gallery.
I see Moundsville right there.
There's a lady from Windsor Heights. So I'll announce her.
Maybe she meant the house gallery. Nothing two's enough.
Senate will please come to order. Senate will please come to order. Further resolutions?
Yes, sir. Senate Resolution 13 by Senators Unger, Trump, Stallings, Blair, Beach, and Rucker, recognizing Leadership Berkeley.
The senior senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I request unanimous consent that the resolution be taken up for immediate consideration, committee reference dispensed with, and the resolution be put upon its adoption.
The senior senator from the 16th requests unanimous consent that the resolution be taken up for immediate consideration, that the committee reference be dispensed with, and that the resolution be placed upon its adoption. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The clerk will please read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 13, recognizing Leadership Berkeley for its service, dedication, and commitment to Berkeley County.
Question before the Senate is adoption of the resolution. Is there discussion? Is there discussion? If not, all those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the resolution adopted. The senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting a resolution.
Senator from Ohio moves that the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting this resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the Senate in brief recess to present this resolution.
Check 1 2, check 1 2. Tom Takubo.
Tom Takubo's here.
Hey, Lee.
Senate will please come to order. Senate will please come to order. Recognize, for what purpose does the senator from Cabell seek recognition?
Ask that we return to the second order of business.
Senator from Cabell requests unanimous consent to return to the second order of business for the purpose of an introduction. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The senator from Cabell.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of my senior senator from the 5th, I'd like to recognize our mayor, Huntington's mayor, Steve Williams. And before he stands, Steve has made a commitment to Huntington that I think reflects well on the city. And that commitment is we don't hide from our problems. We embrace our problems and we work to find solutions for our problems. And he's to be commended for that. And I'd ask Steve Williams, the mayor, to stand and be recognized and welcome.
The senator from Nicholas County.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a pleasure on behalf of many of us sitting here on the floor and you, Mr. President. We have in our gallery this evening, or this morning, sitting in the rear gallery, someone that we've worked closely with over the number of years from the previous governor's administration. Ms. Becky Neal is sitting in the President's gallery. If she would please rise, and if the Senate would please make her feel welcome.
Further introductions, the senator from Brooke County.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the gallery to my rear is Grace Davis. She is the mayor of Windsor Heights. If everybody could please make her feel welcome in the Senate today.
The senator from Greenbrier County.
Mr. President, I'm honored to have my mayor here today, the grand old city of Ronceverte, Mayor David Smith. Will the Senate please make him feel welcome?
Further introductions? Additional resolutions?
No, sir.
Motions? Petitions?
There are none.
Unfinished business?
There is none.
Bills on third reading?
Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 53, correcting code reference in regard to certain persons exempted from prohibitions against carrying concealed deadly weapons. Third reading of the bill.
The question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? The senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee substitute for Senate Bill 53 is actually explained pretty fully by the short title. It amends a single section of the state code, Chapter 61, Article 7, Section 14, that is amended. And the sole purpose of the bill and the sole change in the law is to make corrections to the cross-references that are in that section to other sections of the code. I'd be happy to try to answer questions. Otherwise, I urge passage of this bill.
Is there discussion? Further discussion? Not. The question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 30 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Requesting unanimous move the bill be made effective from passage, and requesting unanimous consent the roll call used on passage of the bill be used to make it so effective.
Senator from Ohio County moves that the bill be made effective from passage and requests unanimous consent that the roll call used on passage be used to make it so effective. Is there objection? Chair hears none. On this question, there being 30 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than 2/3 of those elected having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill effective from passage. Clerk will please communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed Senate Bill 62, adjusting requirements for hiring school attendance directors. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? The senator from Monroe County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 62 is a pretty simple bill in my opinion. It's adjusting the requirements for hiring the school attendance directors. currently in the state, you have to be get a certification, take a class to be an attendance director. All this bill will do is give our county boards a little bit more flexibility and allowing more people to do this in cases where there's, especially when there's no certified person stepping up. This will change it up to where an administrator who had been an administrator for at least a minimum of 5 years can also qualify and meet the hiring criteria for the attendance director. I would agree to this bill. Of course, I wasn't the sponsor on this bill, but I'd agree to this bill because I've seen this in the past, and I feel that, you know, especially a person that's been in administration for 5 years, they'll know attendance probably better than anybody. So, and that's a very important role, and truancy is a major role that we've got to keep our hand on in West Virginia education. So, let me try to answer any questions if you'd like. If not, I'd urge passage of the bill.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Not, all those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? So the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 30 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting. Having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk will please communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 98, creating incentives to consolidate local governments. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? The senior senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 98, its purpose is to create incentives for local governments at the municipal, county, and metro level to consolidate in an effort to save money on local services and to become more efficient. To do so, the bill amends 4 sections of code in Chapter 7 and 7A and creates one new section, 7A 2-5. The bill allows for consolidated municipalities to take advantage of the powers currently reserved for Class 1 or 2 municipalities or counties. The bill also creates new incentives that local governments will receive upon successful consolidation. If a county merges with a municipality to create a metro government, all of the incentives identified for both municipal and county consolidation apply. And finally, the bill expands the reach of any possible consolidation to cover public school districts, library districts, and fire districts. Mr. President, this similar bill passed last year. Senate Bill 534 passed this chamber on a vote of 28-6. It's permissive in nature. Mr. President, I'll be happy to try to answer questions. If not, I urge passage.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Not. The question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will please prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 29 yeas, 1 nay, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting, having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 110, requiring certain licensees notify law enforcement or EMS of life-threatening emergency on premises. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Is there discussion? The senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee substitute for Senate Bill 110 amends a single section of the code. It's Chapter 60, Article 7, and Section 13. And Article 7 of Chapter 60 addresses private club licenses. Section 13 is an existing section that addresses when the ABC Commissioner may take action to suspend or revoke a licensee's license. The committee substitute would add 4 new subsections to the bill. And this arises out of a truly terrible, horrible circumstance that happened in the Eastern Panhandle, where a young man who was in a private club collapsed, ultimately died. but no one for a very long time called for any help for him, any assistance, anything like that. And so the first subsection added here requires a licensee, somebody who holds a license to operate a bar or a private club in timely manner to notify emergency medical services or law enforcement if there's a life-threatening emergency that occurs on the premises. And the failure to do that in this bill then becomes grounds for licensure action, suspension, revocation of a licensee's license. It requires also that if that circumstance occurs and the licensee has to notify emergency medical services or the police, then the licensee is also required to notify the ABC Commission and let them know, what life-threatening emergency occurred in that establishment or bar. There are definitions in here of what constitutes a life-threatening medical emergency, and it's what you would expect. It's respiratory distress, cessation of breathing, severe chest pain, shock, uncontrolled bleeding, poisoning, prolonged unconsciousness, overdose, etc. And then the final subsection of this bill authorizes the ABC Commission to promulgate rules to enforce and effectuate the amendments embodied within this committee substitute. Be happy to try to answer questions, Mr. President. Otherwise, urge passage of the bill.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Not, all those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 30 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting, having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The clerk will please communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Further bills on third reading?
Yes, sir. Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 133, exempting renewal of certain contracts entered into during declared state of emergency. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Is there discussion? The senior senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill comes to us recommended by the Joint Legislative Committee on Flooding, which met during interims, asked questions, received input. The purpose of this bill is to provide exemptions from purchasing when doing so is necessary to respond to a state of emergency that has been declared by the governor. The bill clarifies and deals with contracts entered into during a declared state of emergency. It also provides that contracts that expire that the renewals are dealt with the same way. Finally, the bill exempts purchases of federal supplies related to the recovery, and all of these exemptions are limited to contracts that are directly and safely related to recover from the state of emergency, which the Director of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management must certify to. Be happy to try to answer questions. Otherwise, I urge passage.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Not, all those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 30 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting, having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed Senate Bill 263, eliminating film tax credits. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Is there discussion? The senior senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 263 eliminates the film tax credit starting in 2018, but preserves the rights of those who receive film credits prior to the effective date of this bill to continue to use or transfer them until exhausted or terminated by law. The bill also eliminates the West Virginia Film Office and transfers the responsibilities of winding down the office to the Division of Tourism. Mr. President, I urge passage.
Is there discussion? Is there discussion? If not, all those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 28 yeas, 2 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move the bill be made effective from passage and request unanimous consent that roll call used on passage of the bill be used to make it so effective.
Senator from Ohio County moves that the bill be made effective from passage and requests unanimous consent that the roll call used on passage be used to make it so effective. Is there objection? Chair hears none. So ordered. On this question, there being 28 yeas, 2 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than 2/3 of those elected having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill effective from passage. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed Senate Bill 300, creating 5-year tax credits for businesses locating on post-coal mine sites. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Is there discussion? The senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Engrossed Senate Bill 300 adds a new article in Chapter 11. The bill creates a tax credit for a business with its principal place of business in West Virginia that employs at least 10 full-time people and has its principal place of business located on a post-mine site within the state. The bill makes the credit worth 50% of the business's capital expenditures at the post-mine site for the first 5 taxable years during which the principal place of business is on a post-mine site. The dollar amount of the credit claimed may not exceed the entity's state income tax for a single year. The credit is applied first to corporate net income tax liability and then to personal income taxes, proportionate to allocation of profits and losses to the members of the small business corporations, LLCs, partnerships, or other unincorporated organization. The bill does not allow for a carryback of the credit, but does allow the credit to be carried over the next 5 taxable years. Any business that benefits from other state economic development programs or incentives that result in a reduction in their income tax liability are not eligible for this credit. You can't double dip. The state tax department is required to propose rules for the credit no later than December 31st, 2018, and the credit would go into effect for tax years beginning on or after January 1st, 2019. As you all know, similar bills have passed the Senate unanimously in each of the past regular sessions, but failed over in the House. Folks, this is a very important tool in our toolbox to grow and diversify the economy in areas that mining has occurred. It encourages private investment. Be glad to answer any questions, but otherwise urge passage of the bill.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Not, all those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, there being 30 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Further bills on third reading?
No, sir.
Bills on second reading?
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 146, correcting technical error within Solid Waste Management Act. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
If not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading. Further bills on second reading?
No, sir.
Bills on first reading? Senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Requesting unanimous consent that all bills on first reading be considered as having be advanced to second reading.
Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Introduction of guest. The senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the senator from Brooke and myself, it's my honor to introduce some guests in the rear gallery here. We have the city manager from Wheeling, Bob Herron, our city mayor, Glenn Elliott, and Councilwoman Wendy Scatterday. If they would stand and the Senate make them welcome.
The senator from Preston County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seated in the South Gallery today is the City Manager, Jason Myers, and Assistant City Manager, Danielle Bible from Parsons. If they would please stand and the Senate make them welcome.
Further introductions? The senator from Putnam County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seated in our West Gallery, I see the Mayor of Winfield, Randy Barrett. If he would stand up and please make him welcome.
Further introductions? Remarks by members of the Senate? The senator from Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today begins National School Choice Week, and so I want to take the opportunity to speak a little bit about school choice. School choice is an idea whose time has come. West Virginia, you all know where we are when it comes to education. And we are attacked when we attempt to do anything new or different, but yet we know we have to go somewhere new. School choice enables more people to participate and have decisions as to what is best for their families. It helps eliminate discrimination. It helps to encourage those who are at the bottom. It is something that is everywhere it's done has actually helped public schools to get better. One of the things that I'm tired of hearing whenever anyone brings up school choice is to bring up racism. There is an article in the Mother Jones magazine that I want to read an excerpt from. In late July 2016, the NAACP called for a national moratorium on charter schools, claiming that they target low-income and minority communities with practices mirroring the predatory subprime mortgage lending industry. Now, a group of more than 160 black civic leaders is asking the NAACP to reconsider their decision, arguing that charters create opportunities for black families that could allow minority students to excel. In a September 21st letter of this year, a coalition of educators, current and former politicians, public officials, and black leaders claimed that a charter school moratorium would deny parents the opportunity to choose what's best for their children and restrict access to high-quality alternatives to traditional public schools. Mother Jones is not exactly a conservative publication, not by any stretch of the imagination. These group of 160 leaders and parents, they want the same thing that we all want, a better education for their children. They recognize that when you have competition, you have freedom. And the more freedom and the more competition leads to improvement in all areas. Competition promotes excellence. Anyone who would object to competition with regard to providing education services has a special and personal interest in maintaining the status quo, a status quo that is not living up to our hopes, dreams, and aspirations for our kids. Schools that have to compete for students will become better institutions of learning. In fact, these same schools might have to compete for teachers as well, and that might have a positive effect on teachers' working conditions and salaries. So the fact is that ESA, accounts, charter schools, all of those options are things that we should be looking to bring to West Virginia. It is time that we have school choice. Thank you.
Further remarks? Further remarks? The senator from Upshur County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that the remarks by the senator from Jefferson be recorded in the appendix of the journal.
Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Further remarks? Miscellaneous business. The senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Requesting unanimous consent that leave of absence for the day be granted to the junior senator from the 17th, the senator from Harrison, and the senator from Monongalia.
Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. The miscellaneous business, the senator from Ohio County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Subject to announcements, I move the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Are there announcements? The senior senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Finance will meet today at 3 p.m., and the agenda has been posted.
The senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on the Judiciary will meet today at 3 o'clock p.m., 208 West Wing. The agenda has been posted.
The senator from Brooke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on the Military will be meeting tomorrow in room 208 West at 10 a.m. The agenda has been posted.
The senator from Nicholas County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure will meet tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., room 451M.
Further announcements, the senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Natural Resources will meet today at 1 p.m. in 208 West.
Further announcements, the senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been asked to remind members of the body that the Municipal League reception is tonight from 6 to 7:30 at the Marriott.
Further announcements? Not. The question before the Senate is, shall the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow morning at 11 a.m.? All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the Senate adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.
House will be in order. All those not having privileges to the floor will please vacate the chamber. Members and guests will please rise as we're led in prayer today by the gentleman from the 32nd, Doug Fast.
Thank you. Shall we pray? Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for you because you are God and we are not. You are all knowledgeable and we are not. You are infallible, we are fallible, God. And we acknowledge you as the supreme one who governs the affairs of men. And Father, as we go through this session, I pray that you give us the ability and the wisdom to understand the proper role of government, what we should be into, what we should be doing, what we should not be into, what we should not be doing. We just pray for your help. We need your providential guide and aid during this time. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Members and guests will please remain standing as we are led in the Pledge of Allegiance by the gentleman from the 58th, Doug Coles.
Please join me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Reading the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Charleston, Friday, January 19, 2018.
For all purposes, gentleman from the 50th, Doug Ward, seeking recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read.
Gentleman from the 50th asks unanimous consent that the further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Journal is approved as having been read. Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, today we have a citation presentation honoring Women and Girls Day. Here to receive the citation are women and girls throughout the state of West Virginia. Escorting our guests in the chamber are the ladies of the House and other legislators.
Clerk, please read the citation.
Whereas West Virginia women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our state and nation in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. And whereas West Virginia women have played and continue to play critical economic, cultural, and social roles in every sphere of life in our state and the nation by constituting a significant portion of the labor force. And whereas West Virginia women have served our country and have protected our freedom courageously in the military. And whereas West Virginia citizens are proud of the accomplishments and achievements of women in our state, both in private and public sectors, and appreciate their many contributions to our communities as they continue to advance in leadership roles in our society. And whereas it is critically important that girls be exposed to government inaction, that they are encouraged to consider themselves as capable of being strong leaders, and that they can and should contribute to making West Virginia a better place to live. Therefore, the House of Delegates of the West Virginia Legislature hereby recognizes Women's and Girls' Day and hereby directs this citation be presented.
Members will please be at ease a moment while I greet our guests and present the citation. Introduction of guests. Gentleman from the 48th, Doug and Hamrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With us today, we have a few guests from Harrison County. From the city of Shinston, we have Kathleen Panic, who is the city clerk of the city of Shinston. We also have Amy Wilson, who is the executive director of the Harrison County Economic Development Corp. And from the city of Bridgeport, we have Bridgeport City Councilman Bob Greer and Jeff Smell. Bob Greer is also president of the West Virginia Municipal League. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from 32nd, Delegate Kessinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegates Love and Delegate Fast, we have several people from Fayette County here today representing the Municipal League. If they will stand when I call their name, we have Bill Hannabass, Diane Janey, Demita Johnson, Jeff Atha, Mayor Ingram, Mayor Hanson, and Stanley and Charlene Boyd, and last but not least, my sweet and precious friend, Tom Oxley. So if the House would make them welcome.
John for the 17th, Doug Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the House, I'd like to welcome Mayor Steve Williams, if he'd stand, from Huntington.
John from the 25th, Doug Painter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have 3 pages today from Road Branch Elementary and Middle. I'd like to introduce Mr. Ronnie Abbott, Miss Havana Painter, Miss Jocelyn Paul. They are chaperoned by Donna Paul, Donnie Paul, Brooklyn Paul, Ashlyn Paul, and Sherry Abbott. Let's give them all a nice house welcome.
John from 22nd, Doug Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we have with us with the PAGE program from Chapmanville West Grade School. If they would please stand while I say their name: Ashton Alderman, Derek Dickerson, Skylar Gibson, Natalie Gibson, Madison Baker, Isaac Walters, Alexis Reed, and Whitley Gibson. And they are escorted today by their teachers. If they would stand also, Miss Willis and Miss Alderman. Will the House please make them feel welcome?
John for the 7th, Delegate Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we have our mayor from Harrisville, West Virginia.
Mr. Hott up there in the North Gallery. He also serves on our economic development and multiple other boards there in our county to better improve our constituents' lives in that county. Will the House please make him welcome?
John from 47th, Delegate Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, from Tucker County, we have with us from the City of Parsons, City Manager Jason Myers and Assistant City Manager Danielle Bible, and they're into the balcony to my left. They're standing. If the House will make them feel welcome. Thank you.
John from 24th, Doug Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the House would welcome, they'd stand as I say their name. Serafino Naledi, Mayor of Logan. Jim Blevins, Mayor of MANN. Amber Miller-Vyers, City Clerk of Logan. John Paul Abbott, Town Manager of Danville. And also, Serafino is a board member of the Municipal League, serving as treasurer. And Mayor Blevins is a member of the Municipal League, too, and is on the board member. Thank you. If the House make them welcome.
John from 36, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Kanawha County delegation, I'd like to introduce Mayor Buck Chestnut from Bell, West Virginia. If the House will make him feel welcome.
John from the 19th, Delegate Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Robert Thompson and myself, I'd like to announce that we have 3 pages from Wayne County that appear to be working as we speak. It's Michaela Nelson, Natalie Toney, and Kendra Maynard. They all attend Dunlow Elementary. House, please make them feel especially welcome.
John from 19th, Delegate Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We also have our page's chaperones here from Wayne County. They are Elizabeth Maynard, Karen Toney, Lawrence Toney, Leona McCoy, Jackie Nelson, Mark Geralds, and Amy Vance, and they are seated in the rear gallery, so please make them welcome as well.
Lady from the 50th, Delegate Longstreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the South Gallery, we have the fine gentlemen and ladies who keep our city running, and I would like for them to stand as I introduce them. We have our Mayor, Tom Manella, our Deputy Mayor, Frank Yan, City Council, Ron Strait, City Manager, Robin Gomez, and our City Clerk, Janice Keller. Would you please welcome them?
John from 29th, Doug Moy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of all the delegates that represent Raleigh County, I'm happy to have paging with us today from Hollywood Elementary, Audrey Steele. Audrey, would you stand up and wave to everyone? She is accompanied today by her mother, Allison Steele Norris. And Allison, would you stand? Would the House please make our special guests welcome?
John from the 2nd, Delegate Desario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the House today, and along with our guests, to recognize a former delegate, the Honorable Tim Ennis, who is now our Brooke County Commissioner. Welcome, Tim.
Lady from 51st, Delegate Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 2 announcements today. First, I want to welcome all of the people in the galleries that are at Women and Girls Day today, sponsored by the Women's Commission. They've been doing this for many years. Would you stand and, when the House, give them the warmest possible welcome? And I would like to add to that there were so many people signed up today, they had to cut off registration or they would have violated the fire code. So we had a really many dozens of people, women and girls, were turned away today. I'd also like to welcome people from the city of Morgantown who are here today. Mayor Bill Kowecki is here. I saw Jenny Celine, Rachel Fetty, and Council Member Ron Delaney, and I think I saw our city clerk, and maybe there are some other staff members. Would all of them please stand, and would the House give them a very warm welcome?
Jonathan III, Doug Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the friendly city of Wheeling, I have some good friends and representatives, if they would stand when I say their name. Mayor Glenn Elliott, Vice Mayor Chad Thalman, our City Manager Bob Herron, Councilman Ty Thorngate, my Councilwoman Wendy Scatterday, and I want to give special recognition to Janice Jones, who has given 33 years of service to the city of Wheeling. She's the outgoing retiring city clerk, and she's accompanied by the new clerk, Brenda Delbert, if the House will make them feel welcome.
John from 17th, Doug Lovejoy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Cabell County delegation, I'm very honored to introduce our Cabell County Assessor, Irv Johnson. If Irv would stand in the West Gallery. House, please make him feel welcome.
John from the 34th, Doug Boggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy today in the South Gallery to recognize some good friends. First, from Gilmer County High School and Girl Scout Troop 32394, we've got Girl Scouts Keely McWhorter and Chloe Peggs, and they're accompanied by Keely's mom, Christy McWhorter, if they would stand. And also, I don't know whether they made it back from the Senate yet or not, but they also have their leader here, Marissa Fox, and Girl Scout Carissa Thorne. Please make these fine young ladies and young mother welcome.
John from 30th, Doug Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us in the South Gallery is my friend, my neighbour, and my councilwoman here representing the city of Beckley, Ann Worley. And Ann is a former chair of the Municipal League and, to the best of my knowledge, the only non-mayor to serve in that capacity. So if the House would make her feel welcome.
Lady from the 16th, Doug Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we all know, the West Virginia Academy of Family Physicians sponsors a Doctor of the Day. Today, our doctor is Audrey Plummer. If you all would please make our doctor welcome from Huntington.
John from the 10th, Doug Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you join the other delegates from Wood County, Delegate Anderson, Deem, Holland, Chris, and myself in welcoming Bob Mercer, City Councilman from Parkersburg, Bob Mercer, City Councilman Eric Barber, and our City Clerk, Connie Shaver. Would you please make them feel welcome?
John from 35th, Doug Bird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Kanawha County delegation, I'd like to welcome the Mayor of St. Albans, Mayor Scott James. So would you please stand and the House make him feel welcome?
John from the 32nd, Doug Love.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my colleagues from the 32nd, Delegate Fast and Delegate Kessinger, I have the distinct honor of introducing two honorable guests from our county of Fayette. Seated in the South Gallery is the mayor of what is known as one of the coolest small towns in America. If you'll please stand, Mayor Dennis Hansen. And seated with Dennis is one of his councilmen on the Fayetteville Council, City Council, Mr. Stanley Boyd. Let's give them a a big house welcome. Thank you, John.
John from the 48, Doug Miley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of all of the Harrison County delegates, joining us today in the West Gallery is our good friend and assessor, Rocky Romano, and joining Rocky is a couple of members of his staff, Tammy Stonestreet and Deanna McNeamer. If they would stand and make them feel welcome.
John from the 4th, Doug Farrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Delegate Canistero and I from the 4th District would like to welcome members of two fine municipalities in Marshall County, the cities of Glendale and Moundsville. For the city of Glendale, we have Jane and Dawn Rickman, Wayne and Linda Bureau, Larry and Joyce English, Lou Richmond, and Eric Cunningham. And from the city of Moundsville, we have Judy Hunt, Ginger DeWitt, and Mayor Alan Hendershot. Would they all please stand and have the House make them welcome?
John from the 51st, Doug Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to introduce a couple of guests in the West Gallery today. We have the assessor of Montague County, Mark Music, and with him is his chief deputy, Patrick Tenney. If they would both stand, and if the House would please give them a warm welcome.
John from the 43rd, Doug Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Eisner and me, it's my pleasure to introduce some folks from the City of Elkins, City Clerk Jessica Sutton, and Councilman Charlie Friddle. If they would stand and the House make them welcome.
John from the 55th, Doug Spinagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was sitting down here looking up, and in the West Gallery, I got two fine people that came all the way down here from Franklin, West Virginia here today. I got the Reverend Kevin Hand and his wife, Christy. Will you both please stand, and will the House please make them welcome?
John from 13th, Doug Higginbotham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Jackson County delegation, I'd like to welcome Kim Benson from the city of Ravenswood, if she would please stand. I think she's in the South Gallery. Yes, please make her welcome. In addition, we also have Buffalo High School here today for Girls' Day at the Legislature, so if they would please stand. I'm not sure which gallery they are in. They're up there? Yes, please make them feel welcome.
Further introductions. Reports of standing committees.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2916, authorizing certain first responders to carry firearms, and House Bill 3004, relating to filling vacancies in offices of state officials, United States senators, justices, judges, and magistrates. Reports back to committee substitutes, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitutes each do pass.
Report be received.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 3005, relating to regulation of unmanned aircraft systems, and House Bill 4150, prohibiting telecommunications and IP-enabled voice services from displaying the name or telephone number of the recipient. Reports back committee substitutes, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitutes each do pass.
Report be received.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2727, providing an identification card for released inmates who do not have a West Virginia identification card or driver's license. Reports the same back with amendment, with the recommendation that it do pass as amended and that it be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Report be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on Finance. Reports of select committees. Messages from the Executive. Messages from the Senate.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the adoption by the Senate of Senate Concurrent Resolution 6, supporting construction of Gold Star Families Memorial Monument.
Message be received. Gentleman from the 58th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the committee reference. The resolution be taken up for immediate consideration and put upon its adoption.
Gentleman from 58th, ask unanimous consent that SCR 6, the committee reference be dispensed with, that the resolution be taken up for immediate consideration and put upon its adoption. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The clerk, please report the resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 6.
Question for the House is the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor of adoption will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the resolution adopted. Clerk, please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Further messages from the Senate.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the passage by the Senate of Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 73, modifying crime of fleeing from scene of accident.
Message be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the Senate has passed Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 154, authorizing Department of Administration to promulgate legislative rules.
Message be received. And the bill be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 296, relating to sale or transfer of surplus property.
Message be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 297, eliminating taxation on annuity considerations collected by life insurer.
Message be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on Banking and Insurance and then to Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 298, authorizing county assessors make separate entries in land books when real property is partly used for exempt and partly for non-exempt purposes.
Message be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 299, relating to mandatory insurance coverage for medical foods for amino acid-based formulas.
Message be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on Health and Human Resources and then to Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 301, removing limitation on amount collected by county via hotel occupancy tax used for medical or emergency services.
Message be received. The bill be referred to the Committee on Political Subdivisions and then to Finance. Resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 24, recognizing March 2nd, 2018 as National Speech and Debate Education Day.
Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent the further reading resolutions introduced be dispensed with, and each resolution be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as listed on the Chamber Automation System.
Gentleman 58th, ask unanimous consent the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with. Each resolution be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the Chamber Automation System. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Each resolution be considered formally introduced and so referred. Petitions, motions, bills introduced.
House Bill 4015, relating to the management and continuous inventory of vehicles owned, leased, operated, or acquired by the state and its agencies.
Gentleman from the 58th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with, and each bill be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as listed on the Chamber Automation System.
Gentleman 58th, ask unanimous consent the further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with. Each bill be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the Chamber Automation System. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Each bill be considered formally introduced and so referred. Unfinished business. Bills on third reading.
Committee Substitute for House Bill 3089, relating to the adoption of instructional resources for use in the public schools.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from 66, Delegate Espinosa, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill begins the transition to a process for school systems to select and adopt a wider variety of instructional resources directly from qualified vendors rather than from a list of state-selected materials. Under the new process, vendors that want to offer instructional resources for adoption by the counties must file a statement on or before January 1st verifying that their materials meet certain non-negotiable criteria established by the State Board, cover at least 80% of state-required content and skills for the subject, cost no more than the lowest wholesale price available in any other state, and that electronic files do not exceed the price of the print version. The state superintendent will provide the list of qualified vendors to the counties. County selection committees will conduct their own reviews and recommend materials to the county board for adoption by a majority vote of the members elected. The new process would begin for materials adopted for use in the school year beginning July 1st, 2019. During the transition, the county boards may continue to adopt resources from the existing state-approved list until they expire. The State Board will continue to set adoption cycles by rule, currently about a staggered 6-year cycle. The article does not apply to supplementary instructional resources that schools may want to use but are not required by the county board. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the passage of the bill? Gentleman from 36, Delegate Rowe.
Would the gentleman yield
Gentleman
for
yield.
a
Gentleman
couple of
yields.
questions? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we were in committee in education, there was some discussion about the fact that that the school boards could choose any books that they wanted, that there were no established standards or requirements for what books they would choose. And I think there may have been some concern about even politicizing the process. And we asked the Department of Education to provide a list of what they called the non-negotiables. And I believe there were 4, and it was provided to me, and I wondered, did you get that? Do you have those?
I did.
I didn't keep my copy, but I was struck with the fact that none of the 4 seemed to relate to non-discrimination and appropriate views of ethnicity and different kinds of issues that we have in that regard for diversity. But there was nothing in those 4 that required science that was verified from the scientific community. And I asked specifically about evolution. I said, is there anything that would prevent a school board from choosing a textbook that denied evolution? And they said, well, it would probably be one of our non-negotiables. But in looking at the list, and I, again, don't have that from my email copied, I couldn't see any place that would be appropriate. Were you able to find a place where it would be inappropriate to deny evolution in the selection of textbooks?
Well, to my colleague from Kanawha, I do recall the conversation, the discussion about this issue, and there was some interest in understanding when I believe it was a representative from the Department of Education referenced the non-negotiables. There was interest in the committee in understanding what those non-negotiables are, and as you indicate, you did receive those. I don't think any of those particular non-negotiables would cover the specific issue that you described. However, I think the thrust of the bill and the requirement of the bill is that there's really parity between the process that the local school boards utilize in the local school districts and what is currently required by the state board. And I think what would address the issue that you described really is in the the requirements that I mentioned in my presentation. First, well, in addition to meeting those non-negotiables, each textbook would still have to cover at least 80% of state-required content and skills for the subject. Now, as you may recall, the conversation we had up in House Education really deals with each individual textbook. So each individual or instructional material. Each material would have to still cover at least 80%, but that does not absolve the school district or any individual teachers from covering 100% of the standards and the curriculum which are applicable to that particular class. So even though a particular book may not cover 100% of the material, that instructor is still responsible for covering 100% of the standards and curriculum for that particular subject area.
But that was, I think, part of the concern was that the only requirement is that 80% of the required curricula be included in the book. It doesn't say that that if you're studying evolutionary science that you can deny it as a part of the book. I couldn't find anything in the non-negotiables, which, as I understood their definition, in the non-negotiables, that was that a textbook may not contain information that is racist or inappropriate on gender or ethnicity and those kinds of issues. I saw those, and also anything that was a political, called it a political issue, you can't address in the textbooks. But that was my concern, is that the textbooks could address the subject of evolution, deny it, and it would qualify under any standards that the state board would have, because the state board doesn't put out of bounds a denial of evolution, whereas I think most school boards at this point would. But if you had an election in a school district of 5 persons, and you got a majority of 3 on that board that wanted the school textbooks to deny evolution, then it could be done, because there's no standard for provable science.
Well, I would respond to my colleague in this way by reminding you that what is proposed under this legislation would impose the same requirements for abiding by, making sure that the the proposed instructional materials meet the same requirements that are required under current law, which relegates that responsibility to the state board. So I would suggest that, if there is any legitimate concern, and I'm not sure I share your concern, that could take place today. Any instructional material that is approved by the state board, the requirement is that it cover 80% of the standards and curriculum. So today, under existing law, the state board only requires that instructional materials cover 80%. That's not changed in this legislation. What is changed is that our local school districts, with input from our local educators in a particular district, have the ability to suggest materials that they believe will, in fact, meet the requirements of the state board, including that 80% requirement. But it also responds to really a key issue that I think came up during testimony, that while there are waivers that are possible now, we heard testimony from the department that acknowledged that waiver process is not very district friendly. It can take up to 1.5 years for a material, even though they would meet the same qualifications, the same requirements as state approved materials right now, it can take up to 1.5 years to get those materials approved. And I think the clear message from the department is they acknowledge that that process is not very friendly, not very efficient for our school districts to force an educator who comes up with a instructional material that fully meets the requirements that the board has in place today, to force them to wait up to 1.5 years to get that material approved. So again, I would say simply that what we propose in this legislation does nothing to change the requirements that are currently in place today. It simply provides that flexibility for our local school districts to utilize other materials that may come available that fully meet the requirements that the board has set forth.
Well, isn't this substituting standards and specific information with an 80-20 quantification of something? I mean, it's basically that as long as the textbooks contain 80% of the curriculum, they're to be approved unless they're in those 4 categories of non-negotiables which relate to ethnicity, race, gender, and so on. That they don't relate at all to science and provable science, and that we could have the books cover 80% of the material and then have the professors or the teachers teach that evolution doesn't exist and has not been proved as a matter of science. I mean, that's the concern, is that throughout this, in the discussion of this bill, even the department's discussion, there's been no reference to provable science or to anything that relates to the actual information provided. You know, of course, in history, for example, there are a number of different outlooks about slavery and the Civil War and the causes and things. And by having it open to the school boards to select, then we may have a pattern of teaching across the state that's not uniform, that's very different and maybe even contradictory, and subject to a political process with three members of the board being elected. But again, I did hear I heard between the lines from the department that this is a very cumbersome process for the department. It takes many years to process the textbooks and so on, and that any proposal from the local boards would probably speed up the local board's approval of textbooks. But there was no concern expressed about the content of the material that's provided, and that is my concern. But
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you did.
I would just reiterate that there is nothing in this legislation that changes in any way the requirement that our school districts and educators cover 100% of the standards and curriculum which is established by the state and by their local districts. Really, the question before us is, do we trust our local school districts, our local educators in consultation with their boards? Do we trust them to put in place a process to adopt materials that continue to comply with all the requirements that are in place today? That's really, I believe, the question that's before us. And I would also make it very clear to members, this is not a mandate. This authorized local districts who want to take on this role, who are committed to forming a instructional material a committee in order to thoroughly review these materials to, in fact, make sure they do comply with all the requirements that are in place today. School districts that wish to take on that role will have the ability under this proposed legislation. Those school districts that don't feel comfortable with that, don't believe they have the capacity to review materials themselves, can continue to utilize the state list. So again, I just don't share the gentleman's concern, because all the requirements that are in place today as far as what has to be taught, which is 100% of those standards, remains in place even with this law.
Thank you, sir. May I speak to the bill, Mr.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I just have grave concerns, and it may be because of the history in Kanawha County in I think it was 1973, when the school board office was bombed. We had school buses that were attacked, I think with rocks perhaps, and we had a general uprising here in Kanawha County over school textbooks. And some have said that that is actually the beginning of the new right in America, that that's really the beginning of grassroots conservatism being a part of the school system and in the public discussion generally. But I'm concerned that the school boards being allowed to select their school textbooks and being required only to include 80% of the standard curriculum, that there's room for difficulty in that. I think that we will not see a general uniform curricula throughout the state. I think that students will be going to college with very different opinions of what the facts, whether it's in history or science, would disclose. And I'm just concerned that without some standard that we would refer to, such as provable science, at least provable science, then we are going to go down a road that we will deeply regret. The school board, the state board indicated that it takes a long time for them to process textbooks, and that maybe this would give them a little ease in the process that they have to go through. I'm not sure that's true. I just have not been convinced that we're not opening up a Pandora's box with this legislation, because, as I understand it, there is no requirement that the state curriculum be used other than to include 80% of it. 20% you get to do whatever you want with. I think that's questionable. And leaving that either to the instructor in the classroom or to the school boards in the selection of their textbook, I think is a mistake. So I'll be voting against the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman for the 60th, Doug Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman continue to yield, please?
Gentleman yield. Gentleman yields.
Yes.
Just a few points of clarification.
Yes.
What body establishes the standards for public education in this state, sir?
Department of Education under the auspices of the State Board.
Right. Thank you, sir. And those standards apply across the state to all public schools?
They do, and as I think I attempted to respond to our colleague from Kanawha, this bill does nothing to change standards, curriculum. All those remain in place.
Yes, sir.
I kind of got the sense that our colleague Kanawha is somehow comparing the 80% threshold, which is what the State Board has in place today, or the department has in place today. They have an 80% threshold simply for the instructional materials, right, that requires that any material that is approved and placed on the state vendor list has to cover 80% of the standards and curriculum, which again are not changed by this.
Yes, sir. So the curriculum, whatever is taught in the classroom, I'm sorry for interrupting, I just want to make sure I understand. The curriculum has to cover 100% of the standards, but any given textbook must cover at a minimum 80% of the standards. Is that correct?
You're exactly right. And again, that does not change. The districts and each of our educators still responsible for covering 100%. I think the board's current policy,
yes, sir,
which again is unchanged, it says that any individual instructional material has to cover 80%. That just recognizes that there's probably not a material out there, or I'd say I would suggest probably very few, that in one single book or instructional material covers 100% of everything that has to be covered in that class.
It seems to me that for a book to cover 100% of the instructional material required in a given class, it would have to be written by the people who developed that curriculum in the first place, which would be our own people here in West Virginia, and they probably don't have time to write all those textbooks. Is that correct?
I think your point's well taken.
May I just lay out the way I understand it and have you correct me if I'm wrong?
Sure.
Thank you, sir. The way I understand it is the State Board of Education, State Department of Education, establishes the standards those apply to every classroom across the state. They then select let's say a storehouse. They've got a storehouse of, or a list of selected materials that are available. Then what this bill would allow the counties to do is to choose from among that list to then provide the instruction according to the standards that's provided by the State Department of Education. They would use those materials from that list, and then not only that, but my understanding is that there's a financial limit put on how much they can spend as well on those textbooks. Is that correct?
Well, the one change that this would make is that right now, you're right, the state board has an approved vendor list.
Yes, sir.
This provides flexibility for our local school districts, and particularly for our educators. They find an instructional material that they think would really be a great material to use to help them in their effort to provide 100% of the standards and curriculum in their area.
Yes, sir.
This allows them to submit that material for approval by their local curriculum committee that would be created under this proposed legislation.
Yes, sir.
But again, it would have to meet all, that material would still have to meet all the requirements that the state board would have.
100% of the requirements.
That's right. But the difference would be is that the process is much more, is much quicker, is much more streamlined. As we heard in House Education, it can take up to 1.5 years right now if an educator finds a book that meets all of these state board qualifications to go through that waiver process.
Yes, sir. So
this allows that local district in their curriculum committee to ascertain that it does in fact meet all the state board requirements, allows them to adopt that material much quicker.
So the standards remain the same. The path to get there remains the same, but within that path, the counties have a slight bit of leeway to choose how they're going to follow that path. And it seems to me that since we're talking about educated, certified educators at that level making those decisions for the students they work with personally on a daily basis, that makes a lot of sense. Am I missing something here, sir?
I think you fairly described the benefits of this
Thank
proposed
you, sir. I
legislation.
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
John from the 37th Delegate, Pushkin.
The chairman continue to yield.
Gentleman yields.
Yes.
So would this in any way change the relationship that each county school board would have with the vendor? So the vendor could have contracts with the individual school boards under this if we pass this legislation?
To my colleague, there's an existing list of approved vendors by the state now. Local school districts very well may have an existing relationship with vendors, or so that aspect of it wouldn't necessarily change. The difference is that our local school districts would not be limited to what's already on an approved state list. And again, the testimony we heard from the department is that they do allow waivers currently. If a local district has a book that's currently not on that approved list, there is a waiver process, but the department acknowledged, and what we've heard from school districts, or at least many of us have heard, is that, again, that process takes up to 1.5 years to add any additional books that aren't currently on that list. So they certainly could have, they very well might have a contract right now with vendors, so that part really doesn't change. It just expands the ability for local districts to get an approved vendor on that list.
Thank you. I think I'm going to take that as a yes, kind of. What I'm trying to figure out, will the vendors be able to go directly to the county school boards and lobby them to sell their books? I'm sorry, not to buy their books.
Yes, a local school board can work directly with a vendor. Yeah. However, the same requirements would apply to that contract between a local school board and that vendor that apply currently, as far as all the requirements that have taken place. And again, a few of those things that I had mentioned, for example, they can't cost any more than the lowest wholesale price available anywhere else in the state. So again, I think for those who may be concerned that, oh, this is going to really cause our local school districts to get a much less favorable rate on these books, again, the legislation requires that they cost no more than the lowest wholesale price available in any other state.
But they'll have 55 different entities that they can now lobby to purchase their books. All right, thank you. Thanks.
Further members desiring to speak for, I recognize gentleman from 66 to close debate. Gentleman from 66 wish to step. Question for the House is the passage of the bill. Those in favor of passage will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 72 ayes, 24 nays, 4 members absent not voting. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk, please report the title.
Committee Substitute for House Bill 3089.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, its title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk, please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Further bills on third reading.
Committee Substitute for House Bill 4002, providing that all delegates shall be elected from 100 single districts following the United States Census in 2020.
Request for the House is the passage of the bill. Gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Currently, West Virginia is one of only 10 states to allow for multi-member legislative districts, and only one of 2 states, the other being Vermont, to use them for both chambers. Moreover, only 2 states in the Union have House districts with more than 3 members, West Virginia and New Hampshire. And by way of comparison, New Hampshire has 400 House members. This bill, House Bill 4002, would abolish the use of multi-member districts in West Virginia. Following the 2020 census and the mandated redistricting of the House of Delegates, only 100 single-member districts could be used in the redistricting plan, and that composition of the House would continue in each succeeding reapportionment and redistricting. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the passage of the bill? Lady from the 51st, Delegate Fleischauer.
I urge rejection of this bill for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that the bill does not follow specific mandatory requirements of the West Virginia Constitution. Now, of course, we have to follow the federal Constitution first, but all of us swore an oath to uphold both of them. And the provisions that I'm talking about, if you want to look in your book, are in Article 6, which relates to the legislature, and Article 6 and Section 6 and 7. And those 2 provisions spell out how we are supposed to do redistricting or reapportionment. They, what the 100-member single-member district doesn't do is it doesn't take into account, and it does not even mention anywhere, counties. And one of the things that when our drafters did this, they set up a specific system, a method for doing apportionment that mentions and requires us to pay attention to counties. In fact, counties is used in the word county or counties is used in these 2 sections 6 times, as is the word shall. And usually, and always, shall means shall, that if it's spelled out a certain way, you have to do it that way. And what the way is, there are three things that you can do under our Constitution. One, after the census, you divide the population by the number of delegates, in our case 100, and that gives you the ratio of representation. And then these two sections say each county shall have one delegate district, which is the territory of that county, and then unless the population is 3/5 of the ratio or the ideal, which is right now around 18,000. In that case, you can attach that county, the lower population county, to another county to form a delegate district. Now, these terms are defined in our Constitution, and I believe it makes sense. Regardless of whether New York has single-member districts, we are not like New York. People in West Virginia, when the Constitution was drafted, maybe uniquely identify with their county. They say they're from Lincoln County. We say we're from Boone. We say we're from Marion. We don't mention the municipality or the unincorporated area or the town. We identify with our counties, and that's what the framers put in the Constitution. And I believe that saying we should use a different method than one spelled out in our Constitution is could violate our vote, and I'm voting no for that reason. But there's another reason I also think it is not a good idea to make this shift, which a lot of people think is a very logical thing. You just divide it by 100 and you do that. We have deviated from this rule and have had more smaller districts within counties, and we've just ignored county lines altogether. But by going down to districts that are smaller in number, we have reduced the number of women in the legislature. At one point in time, a few redistricting decades ago, Kanawha County had 10 women representing the county. Now there are only 2. And if you look at the total numbers, it has gone down, it's gone down, it's gone down. And I think the same would be true for African Americans. And the reason why is people say and have said that they don't want a woman representing them, or they don't want a black representing them. But they may feel that that a woman would be competent if she were part of a team of 2 or 3 or 4. And I think that's why people feel more comfortable voting for women, voting for minorities, when there is a larger delegate district. So I think for the reasons I've stated, that we should vote no on this. I think that the real solution is to change our Constitution and have a system where we don't pick our voters, where the voters pick the representatives. And that, I think, would require some kind of objective, neutral group to either make the decision or make a recommendation to the legislature. I think that's the way to go. And until then, I don't think we should be switching the method by which we choose delegates to the legislature.
John from 62nd, Delegate Overington.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me, I hope my voice holds up. Incidentally, that has nothing to do with the fact that I had a disagreement with a closet door and the closet door won. First of all, the multi-member districts, by being a lot larger, means that it takes a lot more resources to run for a district that is larger. For example, in Monongalia County or in Harrison County, you have districts that include 90,000 people, roughly, or 72,000 people. That means it takes a lot more resources to reach those people. It means that the wealthy candidates with more resources have an advantage over those that have less resources. I look at single delegate districts, and I've represented one for 34 years, as your neighborhood district. If in Berkeley County, for example, we had one 5 or 6 member, multi-member district, you'd probably have most of the people living in Martinsburg. I've represented the northern part of Berkeley County, which is very different from the southern part of Berkeley County. So that by having single delegate districts, you have a district, what I call your neighborhood districts. You can get to know the people a lot better. You're going to see them at the grocery store. You're going to see people that you know that will see their delegate and get to know them, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's your local Walmart, whether it's a restaurant. So I see this is a way to have neighborhood districts that are smaller in size, where the public can get to know and to see their local delegate a lot more. Another reason is that in a multi-member district, you're going to have, well, look at it. If you have 5 seats, that means in an election, you have 10 candidates running. Are you going to get to know how all 10 of those feel on issues that are important to you, on, say, Second Amendment issues or pro-life, pro-choice issues? It's going to be a lot harder to get to know all of the positions you're concerned about when you had a multi-member district and a lot more people to have to identify and track down. I want to also mention that when I was first elected, Kanawha County was a 12-member district. And think about the resources that it would take. In the South, they were using multi-member districts to keep blacks out of office. And let me explain how that would work. If you had a district, a black district that had 60% blacks in it, that meant you'd have 40% white. If you combine that with a district that had 80% white, with another district that had 80% white, and a third district that had 80% white, you would end up with a district that instead of being 80%, 80%, 80%, and 40%, you'd have a district that was 70% white. And that meant that in many cases, you would just elect white candidates. That was a way to block blacks from participating and winning elections, making it harder for that to occur. Fortunately, the Supreme Court eliminated that, and no longer do you have multi-member districts in the South, so that you give all races an equal chance. When the Civil Rights Commission looked at West Virginia I think it was 1992, one of the things that they recognized that in West Virginia, our black population is 4%, and we did not have any totally black districts that would be black. But they recognized that you had minority influence districts. And as they looked across the state, they identified one district that was a minority influence district. That was the 37th district in the Charleston area. And the result of that was that we elected a black woman. She served as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Carrie Webster. We elected after that Misha Poore, a black woman, so that that would not have occurred if it was part of a multi-member district. So I think that for that reason, that is another reason why we need to look at single delegate districts. I want to tell you a story. I remember years ago, we had a delegate that was representing a 3-member district that included 3 counties in southern West Virginia. This was an individual that was very conscientious. It meant that he had 3 sets of county commissions that he had to meet with, and he wanted to keep in touch with the voters there. It meant that you had 3 sets of school boards that he had to meet with. It meant that you had a lot of different cities in the district. And he, as I said, he was a very conscientious delegate, Mr. Speaker, and he wanted to do that. But he just didn't have the resources and the time to do it, and he gave up and stopped running. If he'd been in a single delegate district, I think he would have continued to serve the people in his area. Last point I want to make is that there is one advantage to multi-member districts, and I want to make sure that I clarify that this does not apply to anybody here in the chamber. But if you have a multi-member district and a delegate that's not really paying attention, that's not returning phone calls, that's not involved, if you're in, say, a 4-member district, the delegate's not attending meetings, not doing his job, he's got 3 other people to cover for him in a 4-member district. So that is an advantage, I will admit, that you have other people that can cover for you if you don't want to do your job the way you're expected. So, for Mr. Speaker, for these and other reasons, I strongly support us having neighborhood districts with 100 single delegate districts across the state of West Virginia. Thank you.
John from 67th, Delegate Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to echo some of the comments, gentlemen from the 67th District. One of the things I think we do need to bear in mind here is the 1962 case, Baker versus Carr, the one man, one vote, which then engendered the change in the manner in which that we hold districts here in the United States on the federal level. But certainly this has been challenged at one time or another, the one man, one vote here in West Virginia, and we're not violating that. But I would challenge the idea that we're living up to the spirit of that constitutional principle of one man, one vote with multi-member districts. And I don't think that we are living up to the spirit of that and that constitutional principle currently. It's certainly arguable that single-member districts being more equitable, more fair in terms of representation, and also more fair to the constituents that are served by a single member as opposed to a multi-member district. And I would also challenge the idea that multi-member districts engender greater diversity in terms of representation. I would only by example look at the 2 arguably largest growing counties in the state of West Virginia, Jefferson County as opposed to Mon County. Now, in the multi-member district in Mon County, you don't see any ethnic diversity in that district. It is ethnically homogeneous. Now, you look at my county, single-member districts where we are. I am the only white member of the West Virginia State Legislature from Jefferson County, and that's including the Senate. So I think that the gentleman's comments from the 67th are certainly ring true if you look at the level of diversity that we have out in the Eastern Panhandle, something that I'm very proud of, and I know our members and our constituents are. And I think those single-member districts will bring greater equality and bring us greater representation, and as the gentleman from the 67th pointed out, also greater accountability. And I'd urge the body to pass this because the end of the day, greater accountability is the one check and one principle that we all need to adhere to here. So thank you.
Gentleman from 58th, Delegate Coles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I would urge support for the bill in single-member districts in West Virginia, and I'll give you 5 quick reasons why. First, I'll agree it upholds the principle of one man and one vote. But also larger multi-member districts also disenfranchise voters. It disenfranchises women voters, men voters, minority voters, all voters. There is simply better responsiveness and ability for voters to hold their elected officials accountable in smaller single-member districts. Thirdly, this bill eliminates the remaining disappointing fossil from the Jim Crow era. Multi-member districts were indeed used to dilute minority voters' influence all across the South. This eliminates that. And it moves towards good government with lower cost campaigns and more direct representation. And finally, 5th reason is gone will be the large unequal districts. And they will be replaced with equal in size, single-member districts. That is just good government, and those are my 5 reasons, Mr. Speaker, why I support the bill and would urge my colleagues to do the same.
John for 36, Delegate Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to point out something that is not being discussed. It just feels good to have, say, one man, one vote, and single-member districts are just fine and everything. But look what they produce. Single-member districts entrench incumbents. You want to look at your 20-year members, they're in single-member districts. In Kanawha County, to my knowledge, not one single person in a single-member district has ever been defeated in an election, either in a primary or a general election. Now, doing this without term limits makes no sense, because the reality of single-member district and the entrenchment of incumbents is that no one has the ability to overcome the presumption that it's their seat. And what you have is you don't have new candidates and new blood coming into those districts. And that denies the new blood that we need in this House. Now, if an incumbent decides to run for Senate, then we've got an open district, and then it's a free-for-all, and we have lots of people come forward, and that's the way it should work. But to think that you're establishing these districts where incumbents will be entrenched literally for their entire lives until they elect to leave, we're kidding ourselves if we think that we're improving the electoral process or improving the leadership that this body needs. Now, there are good reasons to vote in favor of this bill. And one is that we have proven census after census that we are incapable of fairly making districts that really represent areas. We gerrymander it to death. And you say, only in multi-members districts. No. You know, if people think that they are going to get centered single-member districts, I think they need to look at it. Because in counties where these multi-member districts are, I think especially, you're going to see a lot of gerrymandering. And so, you know, if we could be assured that we had a system that would create neighborhood, I think that was one of the terms that one of the gentlemen used, neighborhood districts. In other words, districts that make sense in terms of who they are and what communities they represent. This might be a good idea. And it still may be a good idea. That's what we have to weigh, and I'm still trying to weigh as we stand here. But to think that what we're giving up with entrenched incumbency versus in multi-member districts, that's where the turnover is, and that's where it has always been. And they tend to be in more urban districts, not always, but in more urban districts. And it develops a leadership turnover that allows us to have some of the really solid new members that join this body. I think that's should be part of the calculus. And I think a part of it, for the folks who vote yes on this bill, needs to be a commitment that we're not going to gerrymander ourselves across rivers and across mountains and whatever it takes to make sure we get our numbers straight. Then I think that this bill, you know, deserves some consideration. There is the proposal, and I would emphasize that this makes sense. There is a proposal to have a districting commission to figure out how these districts should be drawn. But if we draw these single-member districts in the way that we've always drawn them in the past, they're going to look awful and they're going to be awful, and people still won't know who their delegate is. Now, the Senate, I will point out that I heard the chair of Judiciary, Senator Trump, say that he liked an idea where they would reduce the number of senators from 34 to 32, and that the delegates would be apportioned inside senatorial districts. Now that at least would prevent some of the gerrymandering that I think is going to be a wild show in just 2 years. But I think that there are a number of possibilities that we can look at. But what's important is I ask each member, if you support this idea, to look very carefully at how incumbents get entrenched and never leave their seats until they decide to do it or die. Now, that's the history of incumbency in single-member districts. And we're not here to protect delegates and to create an entrenched incumbency. We're here to be fair and to encourage new leadership to come in, take on someone who is in the body, and defeat them on a fair and square basis. That's not what happens in single-member districts. So I would just encourage the members to accept the commitment that we're not going to gerrymander, and that when we create these districts, they're going to be sensible as to the communities that the members would represent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 40th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I don't come down to speak on things unless I think they are truly, truly important, and many things we do here are important. I'm not saying that those are not. But I think this bill is something that has been discussed in the 20 years that I've been here, and really goes to the core of this process that each of us have had the honor to serve in. And I think that's important for us to have the debate we're having today, because I do think the points that have been brought up are things that have been discussed every time we get to the point of a redistricting process in our state after the census. I've had the pleasure, and I say pleasure because it is a pleasure to be a part of it, but it is one of the most somewhat uncomfortable processes that we go through when we redistrict after each census, because we're basically, all of us who have been here and gone through that know that it's something you're kind of glad when it's done, because you are uncomfortable about who are you going to run against, and are you going to end up running against someone that's your colleague, or whatever might come up in those districts. We end up having members wanting this precinct or not wanting that precinct. But let me say why I think this is an incredibly, incredibly important piece of legislation. And I'm going to say this because I've been one of the few members in this House who have run from both a multi-member district and a single-member district. When I was first elected, I was a part of the 4-member 32nd district. What did that district entail? It was Elkview, Clendenin, Sissonville, Crosslanes, Nitro, St. Albans. Now, that's a large area. And I love representing that area. And so there are, it was an honor to represent each of those areas. But when I tried to be at all the things that occurred in those areas, and to be able to be at many functions as I could be, and have as many opportunities as I could have to be available to my constituents to talk to me, as we know, so much of the input we get as delegates is not from a scheduled formal meeting. It's from running into people in the grocery store, in the neighborhood, at the ball game, whatever that might be. That's where I get most of the input I get. Certainly talking to people on the phone when they call. But I probably hear from as many people out just, hey, glad I ran into you. I wanted to tell you, I don't like this bill you're working on. Or I like this. Or I think you should do this. Or I need this, you need some assistance in my area with a road or whatever that might be. So I've had the pleasure of being a member of a multi-member district, later a 3-member district in the 32nd, and now as a single-member district in the 40th district. And I can tell you that I see tremendous advantages to having a single-member district in terms of my relationship with my constituents, because I can go to so many more events, so many more things in that district. I can have so much more single one-on-one contact with individuals in that district. I guarantee you I've had more of those discussions as a single-member district representative than I had, because there was just such a large area to try to cover. And let me also say this, and I realize that that often I talk about this event from June of 2016 because it was probably the single most significant event that's ever happened in the district I represent, and that is the flood that devastated our communities. I'm glad we had a person that lived in those communities representing that area. And let me say this because I don't doubt that other members, and I know other members of this House, worked and helped and even rolled their sleeves up and came up and helped in those areas, or in Lewisburg, or in other areas that were affected. But Before I was elected to represent this area, it was 1978 when there was the last person that ever represented my area that lived in that area. Because when it was a 12-member district that was all of Kanawha County, most of the delegates from that area were from Charleston and South Charleston, just because of the population. There was occasionally one that would be from another area, but most of those delegates were from those other areas. And I'm not saying they didn't try very hard to represent that area. They did, but they never lived in that area, and they never had those one-on-one relationships with the people that they had an opportunity to develop those relationships in their own neighborhood, in their own communities. So that's why, it's incredibly important, I think, that we, as the House that is seen as and is truly constitutionally the House closest to the people, we represent a smaller group of people, a smaller number of people, so that we can be more attuned to what is going on with that smaller group of people than the Senate. Why would we not want to make this House as accessible, as accountable as it can be? And I truly believe that this is a bill that does just that. And I strongly believe that. And I have strongly believed that for 20 years. And we tried. And it was as a result of those efforts that I now have the honor to represent a single-member district, as others have. We have fortunately grown in numbers of single-member districts as we've gone through these redistricting processes. That's the right trend. There's a reason for that, because I think people are recognizing how important it is to have that person that they know is their representative. Now, that doesn't stop us from working together. I've heard the argument, well, if you have 4 or 5, 3 members, 4 members, 5 members, they'll work more and they'll have more class. We still work together. I still talk to the people who represent adjacent areas and other areas. The Kanawha County delegation works together on things. We don't always agree on everything, but when it's something that's important to Kanawha County, we work together, as you do with those in your county. So I don't think that this is going to in any way harm the ability of us to do that. Finally, let me just say this, and I'm going to, my colleague from the 51st made a reference to our Constitution. And I would just read that the beginning of that section that my colleague represented says this: after every census, the delegates shall be apportioned as follows. The ratio of representation of the House of Delegates shall be ascertained by dividing the whole population of the state by the number of which the House is to consist. And then it goes on and talks about a number of different areas. Taking the whole population of the state and dividing it by the number of people in this House. So that would be the population of the state divided by 100 members. That's the ideal population that people of people that we should represent. And I know through federal law there's a variance where we're never going to get that exact. We have to get it within this variance. That's the general principle of our Constitution. Taking the population, dividing it by the number of people we have, and giving them a representative. And that's what federal law now requires. That is what we are required to do in this. And we have complicated that beyond comprehension, in my opinion, by having single members, double members, 2 members, 3 members, 5 members. How could we make it more complicated? How could we make it more confusing? How could we make it more, inequitable, in my opinion, as to what each different areas have? We should do it the way that sentence says, in my opinion, and that is 100 single-member districts dividing the population after the 2020 census. We will each come to this body. I will not, but others will come to this body and represent roughly the same number of people in your communities, in your neighborhoods that you'll talk with day in and day out. And so I think that is incredibly important that we do it that way. I think what you say, why do it now? A couple of reasons. One being, we're already in this is a 10-year process. We will begin to get census data soon, even though the 2020 census isn't done. There's projection data that's done. There is a process that goes on. We will begin the steps that we will need to do to do a redistricting after the 2020 census. Why would we not know know that we're going to follow a single-member district concept now when we do that? And the second is, each of you will make plans as you go forward. Is it not fair to you to know when I run, if I do, so if someone wants to run after in 2022, they'll know they're running in a single-member district. And they know it up front now. And they can make plans between now and then. And your districts can make plans for that. So I think this is incredibly important that we do this. I think it's the fair thing to do. My races as single-member districts, my colleague from the 36 said it protects incumbents. I'm not sure it does. I think what it does is it makes us, maybe the reason that incumbents get reelected is because they're more accountable to the people that they represent in those single-member districts, and they have to be more accountable, and that relationship builds to where those members have a district that's comfortable with them being their representative. Perhaps it's the other way around, that the people get elected in those districts because they're more accountable to that district, and I think that's true. My races, when I was running in a 4-member or 3-member district, it wasn't a one-on-one. I didn't have anywhere near the type of debates and one-on-one, back and forth as I did after it became a single-member district when those elections took place. So for those reasons, and all the other reasons that have been expressed here today, this is the right thing to do for West Virginia. It's the right thing to do for the people we represent. I truly believe it's what they want us to do from what I've heard, and we should take this important step today. I would love to see not only 100 single-member districts, but 100 votes for 100 single-member districts. Probably not going to happen. But I think it's important that we do this today, and I urge your support for it from the bottom of my heart. I think it's incredibly important. Thank you.
The lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I would just like to state very briefly that the people of District 49, which I represent, which is most of Taylor County, but one piece was pulled out to go somewhere else, a portion of Marion County and a portion of Mon County, disprove the fallacies that the gentlelady from the 51st and the gentleman from the 36th put forward. They said that the single-member district wouldn't elect a woman because she wasn't part of a team. And they said that a single-member district would keep an entrenched incumbent. My district has disproven both of those fallacies, and I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
The gentleman from the 50th, Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You're correct. There's not going to be 100 votes for this bill, and I'd like to explain why I'm going to be a no vote. I come from a multi-delegate district, as you well know. I've survived 2 redistrictings that I've been a part of since I've been here. I've been reelected 11 times. And we don't use a multi-delegate district to hide or protect incumbency. If you look at all the years that I've served in this House, I think I've only had 2 primaries that I wasn't opposed. And every general, I've faced stiff opposition, or we faced stiff opposition in that district. You know, I believe that we should come here and we should represent our districts and do what we think is best and what the people in our districts want us to do. And I got to tell you, for the 2 decades that I've served Marion County, I have not had anybody complain to me about the multi-delegate district in Marion County. Matter of fact, they compliment it because they see us working together as a team and working better for Marion County, whether our delegation has Republicans in it, as it does now, or it was full of Democrats. We tried to move forward in one direction, even though we disagreed on different issues, to move forward for the betterment of Marion County. You know, I think this is also very, very premature, Mr. Speaker. There's going to be a lot of us who's not even going to be here when this census is complete and when we're redrawing those lines. So we're going to make a decision today that is going to affect this body, whomever may be sitting in these seats 3 years from now, and tie their hands that they have to carve out single delegate districts for everyone in this state. Now, look, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't understand Berkeley County, and you may talk to your constituents, and they may want a single delegate district, and that's just fine. But for you to dabble and to meddle into multi-delegate districts and tell a future legislature that they can't do that, even if it's for the best interests of their constituents, I think is absolutely wrong. Now, I know this is part of the GOP principles in your platform, and I get that, and I respect that. Have no problem with that. But are we really doing the right thing here? I want you to ask yourselves, particularly if you've been here for a while, how many people in your district, and I want you to be honest with yourselves, came to you and said, we got to have single delegate districts in this state? Now, you may have had some. I'm not going to deny that. But has it been a groundswell of people that came and that's been at the top of their wish list or their top of their agenda? I think if you answer yourselves honestly, the answer to that is no. And, you know, I just go back to what delegate from 36 said. I've had opposition in every race. And I think if you look at single delegate districts as a whole, as their entirety, you're not going to see a lot of that. You're really not. Let's just be brutally honest. But I think Marion County is okay with the multi-delegate district. I think we should leave that up to the folks in 2021 who may be here representing Marion or Harrison or Berkeley or whatever the case may be, and let them get a feel for their constituents. Let them do what they think they're sent here to do, rather than forcing a single delegate district on someone that maybe is working well. I just think you ought to leave that up to the representatives. It's a battle that's been around here a long time. I think it's a battle that we don't need to have, particularly 3 years before it's going to happen. I'm going to ask the body to vote no, because I respect you in your decision. If you think your constituents want a single-member district, I think you should do the same and respect those of us, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, that serve in a multi-delegate district, and let us make that decision when the time comes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
John from the 37th delegate, Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to tell you, thank you, and I'm relieved to hear you and other members who are speaking in support of this bill to talk about the reasons why, being good government, accessibility, about being more accessible to our constituents, about equal representation, about the principle of one person, one vote. Women also vote. It's one person, one vote. I think if that's truly what our intentions are, is good government, accessibility, practicality, then I think we're putting the cart before the horse on this. What's more important to me than how many districts we have is who's drawing the districts. Now, so in practical matters, if we pass this law without the other bill that is in subcommittee about an independent redistricting commission, think about what's going to happen when we're completely redrawing the state. We have 100 different delegates going downstairs nonstop trying to figure out what their particular district is going to look like, who they might be running against in this room. It could very well be a mess. So I would just hope that everybody that votes in the affirmative also sincerely supports the bill that is currently in subcommittee. I hope we can get it out of that subcommittee. I hope when it gets to the floor, everybody, whether you vote for this or against this, and I want to tell you, I'm leaning voting for this bill. So I'm not speaking against this bill. I can see both points, but I'm leaning towards voting in the affirmative. But I will also, what's more important to me is who's drawing the districts. So I sincerely hope that we get that bill out of subcommittee and get that to the floor. That's going to be way more important than how many districts we have. If we truly care about good government, if we want to do this for practical measures, if we want to save ourselves a whole lot of heartburn in a couple years, whoever happens to win this election cycle and is back here, and for future legislators, we need to pass an independent redistricting commission. That's what's more important.
John from the 10th delegate, Dean.
No, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this legislation and to refute what the delegate from Kanawha County said, that being in a single-member district would guarantee your re-election. he forgot to mention what those delegates and those single members, who they were, and how good a job they did. That's why they were reelected, not because they were a single-member district. And I say the same thing about Delegate Anderson. He's in a single-member district now. You know why he gets elected? Because he teaches history in Williamstown High School in his district, and nobody will ever beat him because he's popular in that single-member district. And one other reason I think it's important to have single-member district, Mr. Speaker, is that the money. See, now I'm in the 10th district, and there are 3 delegates in our district, and the other 2 do a great job. I really don't have to do anything. I can just take credit for what they do. And the newspaper calls me, and I quote them as doing a good job for me. So I like to keep it that way, but I also believe that I run in a single-member district, like my colleague here does really now, and worked in part of Wood, and he does a good job. But I think I could win either way. But I think it all depends on what you do when you're down there and how popular you are with your constituency. If you're doing a good job for them and stay in touch with them, you'll win. And whether you're in one or the other. But I think that, the emphasis really on the single-member districts is that you are the one who represent your people, not 4 or 3, but 1 individual. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 36th, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the lead sponsor yield?
Gentleman from the 62nd, Delegate Overton yields.
Delegate, I'm going to lean on you for some of your institutional knowledge here. Are you aware, how many bills have we passed this year?
The clerk could probably give you a better answer than I could.
Like 4 or 5, just as an estimate, something like that?
We've got many in the pipeline and are working on them.
Okay. And then this is my second year, so I'm not sure of the rollover House bill numbers, but this bill is 4,002. That would mean this is the second bill introduced this year, correctly, not counting the rollover bills from last year?
That would, I think, be a correct assumption.
Okay, thank you. Speak to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, may proceed.
We're speaking a lot about talking to our constituents and how they reach out to us, what they tell us at the grocery store and those kind of things. I'll tell you the number one thing that people complain to me, and some of you all might hear it as well, is the priorities of this body. The priorities of this body, we're accused constantly of the priority of this body is about our next reelection. And for the second bill to be introduced in this body to be about our reelection, the third or fourth or fifth bill to be passed by this body being our reelection. I think this body needs to readjust their priorities and not worry about the next reelection and maybe about jobs, economic growth, and the opioid crisis. Thank you.
The lady from the 18th, Delegate Sabonia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't about legislators. This is about the people of West Virginia and about their representation. It's not about us, it's about them. The lady of the 51st stated that women, it's hard for them to get elected in a single-member district, but I would suggest that there's 15 women in the House, and the majority of the women elected in the House are from single-member districts. When I first got elected in 2002, there were 2 3-member districts that represented the Cabell County in the House of Delegates. There were 2 equal districts. The county was divided into half. It took up a portion of one county, and the other district took up a portion of another. But half of the people of Cabell County were represented by 3 delegates, and the other half were elected by 3 delegates. So in that county, there was a little bit more equal representation. In the last redistricting, my district, District 18, was created, and it carved out a single-member district, which I've never been told The reason for that, when they left a two-member district in Cabell County and a three-member district in Cabell County. So how in the world can we, with a straight face, say that people in Cabell County, some people only deserve one voice at the legislature, some people deserve two legislature, and some people deserve three voices at the legislature. And if you're in a four-member district, they deserve four voices at the legislature. It's a disparity that the legislature has created. And I say that this bill, creating 100 single-member districts, removes that disparity and says that everyone represented in the state of West Virginia have a voice at the legislature. Not 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, or whatever we determine, but, you know, it's equal representation. And I say, if you support a system that is fair and equitable, and you want to put the people first and give them their voice at the legislature, then I say vote for this bill. If you want to protect the status quo and the system, I think, you know, we are only one of 2 states to do it this way. We're an outlier. Why do we want to continue to be an outlier when it comes to representing the people of West Virginia? I say remove the disparity, quit putting politics first, and let's pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman for 56, Delegate Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I come into this body in the 80th legislature, I served with 100 members. After 3 election cycles, there are only 26 that are still here. Of that, 11 are from multi-member districts, 15 are from single-member districts. That tells me statistically there is no real difference between multi-member and single-member when it comes to incumbency, and if anything, it may actually favor the multi-members. But this bill is about fairness of the people that elect us. If you have a problem with the Department of Highways, DHHR, need help, and you live in the city of Kaiser, you can call your delegate, which is me, or you can call 2 state senators. If you live in Morgantown, you have the same problem. You can call 5 delegates and 2 senators. That's unfair representation of the people. That puts people in single-member districts at a disadvantage. Morgantown has 5 votes in this House. Kaiser has 1. Martinsburg has 1. That is not fair to the people that live in single-member districts. And the only way that we can fix that is to have 100 single-member districts to create fairness for the voters of this state. Thank you.
Lady from the 51st, Delegate Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to respond to my colleague from the 49th. What I said was that I think single-member districts make it harder for women to get elected. And this was said to a woman, I mean, the idea that there are certain people who would not vote for a woman was said to several times to a woman who was running for the Senate last year. And it's appalling to me that anyone would say that in this day and age. But I have to say that you probably know better than anyone else that women have to work harder for everything that we do, and it's an indication of you're a quality candidate, that you won. I will concede that. Secondly, just this whole idea of fairness, I find really strange, and we're talking a little bit about my district. My district includes many towns. So it's not just the towns of Morgantown that are being represented, but Star City, Blacksville, Westover. I think we have 5 or 6. And we have large unincorporated areas that are also being represented. But it's, I also get a lot of calls from Preston County for people that are on the border. And one of the problems that we have, because we've gotten away from county borders, is it's more confusing. The process that's in our Constitution of sticking with county borders is less confusing. People know the borders of county, but there's all kinds of blending. It's partly because of the federal requirements. And, you know, you can say that, I just totally disagree that we comply with one person, one vote. There's just no question that there's any issue that we don't do that, or that having single-member districts or multi-member districts is more fair or less fair. I think the most important thing is we all took an oath to uphold the state constitution. And we can uphold the state constitution and the federal constitution, but we can't do it if we only pick out one sentence that we're going to follow. And that's about the ratio. There are other sentences that say we have to do it in a certain way. And we can't pick and choose among those sentences if we're going to be consistent with our oath. So I urge rejection of this. I think that we should have a redistricting commission that is neutral, that doesn't look at where people live and who might be positively or negatively affected. And I think that you should vote no on this bill.
John from 27th, just close debate. Gentleman from the 34th, Doug Boggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm going to be the first one, I think, maybe not the first, but I'm going to be one of the first to invoke the often heard phrase at the legislature. I hadn't intended to speak today, so I truly hadn't intended to speak today, but I believe I'm probably the only person in this body that has chaired a redistricting committee. And I want to tell you, if you want to make everybody mad, that's the best way to do it. Trust me. It doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or Republican, independent, no matter whatever, you're going to make somebody mad whether they're in your party or not. And I stood where the majority leader is sitting now and put forth a plan, and I endured the hate-filled remarks and a lot of things privately that weren't here publicly, trying to do truly what was the best job that we could do. You know, these districts have to be plus or minus 5% in the House districts. I believe in the Senate it's 10% plus or minus. So, and I'm pulling this from memory, I believe the districts at the time after the census were 18,018. So you could deviate 5% plus or minus from that. And in order to try to preserve municipalities, try to preserve county lines to the best possible, you try to use that 5%. And there was a lot of computer software and things that we had to rely upon that will be available the next time too. But I truly believe if you want this to be what we're all talking about, then if you're going to enact this, you have to enact something that's going to take this body out of it and invoke a nonpartisan way to apportion these districts. Because I think to do otherwise, all you're doing is trading one situation for the other. Now let me give you a little bit of background on the single versus multi-member district. During 2011, many of you came to me and to others that were on the redistricting committee and indicated that you wanted a single-member district. To the lady from the 18th, I'm not sure if you came or not, but there was an indication that there seemed to be that was someplace that was an interest in single-member district. Also, Mr. Speaker, I believe you and I had a conversation about taking your previous three-member district and dividing it up into 3 single-member districts, which we went over in the office over there, and we sat down together, and we worked it out, and we accommodated it. And we went from, I believe we had a net gain of about, I'm doing this from memory, about 11 more single-member districts than we had prior to the last redistricting. But obviously, anytime you change somebody's district, there's going to be anger. You know, you took my neighborhood, you gave it to somebody else. My family lives there. No, I don't want this. You gave it to this person. You know, those are just some of the inevitable things that you have to deal with when you're looking at neighborhoods, boundaries, and those type of things that you're required to do. During the last redistricting, we set up a communications, whether it was through, we set up a special website, had a dedicated 800 number, and I'm sure people got letters, calls, but we directed everybody to that website, to that phone number, and despite a statewide PR campaign, we only had about 100 calls, emails, and communications into that website professing to want 100 single-member districts, and many of them were the same folks called multiple times. So I represent a single-member district. I have since I've been in this body, but it was mentioned earlier about not having to deal with as many boards of education and county commissioners. I represent Braxton and a portion of Gilmer. My friend from 33rd represents 3, a portion of Gilmer, all of Calhoun, and a portion of all of Clay. Even with a single-member district, he's got 3 counties and county officials he has to deal with, and I'm sure he does it. And he does that. I do the same thing with 2. So I don't think a single-member district is going to mean that you're going to necessarily have to deal with less boards of education, county officials, anything like that, which I don't see as a burden. I just think it's an opportunity to get more information. But one of the reasons that I heard most prominently the last time, for better or for worse, and I guess you can use this information and make your case on both sides of this issue. We had a lot of mayors, we had a lot of county commission members, we had a lot of citizens that live in the large municipalities that didn't want to get split up. They wanted it multi-member districts. And even despite that, there were some changes made that still reduced the size of some of the districts, but still kept intact some multi-member districts. But I got to tell you, one thing that I recall, when somebody comes to you and says, I'm really happy in my my 2-member district, but I just can't vote for it because I promised a group that I would vote for single-member districts, but I don't want a single-member district. Don't give me one. I want to stay in a 2-member district because I'll lose if I'm put in a single-member district, but I've got to vote for that. I want to tell you something. That is the height of hypocrisy, and that's exactly why we need to make this nonpartisan. Just like the gentleman from Kanawha said, it's difficult for me to vote against this bill because I do represent a single-member district. But if we want to be pure in our motives, let's do it in a way that takes politics out of it, let the chips fall where they will, and let's go from there. At the end of the day, I don't think it matters if you're in a single-member district or a multi-member district. If you're doing your job, your constituents know it. They see it. They hear you. You hear from them. You go to them. And they come to you. They're a resource, and you're a resource to them. But, you know, I just feel like that to a certain degree, I think this train has somewhat left the station. I think that this train has left the station way too early with all the other things that we have on our agenda that need to be taken care of. But I think that if we don't do this and we leave the politics in it, we're just asking for more of the same. I have to tell you, I used up every bit of my vacation that I had from my work. I went off and took days off without any pay whatsoever, and I was here for weeks and weeks and weeks from early in the morning till late at night. And it's a tough job. And the other people that were on the committee that assisted on both sides of the aisle, it's a very tough job. And so I would just ask that if you vote for this, vote for the other legislation that's in the I believe it's in subcommittee right now. Vote for that too. Because one without the other, I think, is just trading one situation that everybody seems to complain about for others. But let's not get caught up in the fact that while this is an important issue, we've got vital issues that deal with lives, addictions, jobs that we need to take care of first and foremost before we start worrying about political lines. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from the 51st, Dr. Fritsch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I currently represent a 5-delegate district. It used to be a 4-delegate district. I was not here when the redistricting occurred. I do live on the same street, the same road as the other gentle lady from the 51st district. So this will be, I believe this bill will have a great change, perhaps on some of us in a direct personal or pecuniary way. So I'm requesting to be excused from voting with the Rule 49.
To the lady, I believe that I understand your concern. This would affect not only the members here who may decide to run again, but it would affect anyone else who might choose to run again, who may not be a member of this body. In that sense, I think it would be prospective in the sense of any of us, and therefore I don't believe you have a direct pecuniary interest, and if so, be as a member of a class, and therefore the lady would be directed to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to cover that base.
The gentleman from the 60th, Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman of the Judiciary please yield for a question?
Gentleman yield. Gentleman yields.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I represent about 18,000 people in a single member district. If my math is correct, and if I understand what we're discussing here, a 3-member district would be composed of approximately 54,000 citizens. Is that correct?
If your math is correct, it would be, yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So each of those 3 delegates from that 3-member district would represent all 54,000 of those citizens. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, sir. So effectively, when a delegate from a 3-member district speaks, they're speaking for 54,000 people. I'm speaking for 18,000 people. Is that correct?
Roughly speaking, yes.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your time. Permission to speak to the bill, sir?
Gentleman may proceed.
It seems to me that it's very clear that if we are interested in the principles of fair, equitable, transparent, responsible government, that we have to vote for this bill. We have to have fair, equitable, transparent, and responsible representation of each citizen of this state, and it's very clear to me that that's what we need to do. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman from 36, Delegate Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been trying to do a rough count by looking at the manual, and it appears to me that the emperor may have no clothes. The single-member districts, I count at 47, and it's a rough count. 35 are Republican and 12 are Democrat. Now, the difference there is, I'm not really good at math, certainly, but that's about, 23 votes. That's more than the difference in the plurality in the House. I think without accepting responsibility to limit incumbency. Now, I mean, when you've got over half of the members of your party who are already in single-member districts and imposing that throughout the state without a commitment to term limits or to some non-gerrymandering judicial commission that can, legislative districting commission, this is just pure politics. And I think it's just amazing that there has been no contradiction that, in fact, generally, single-member districts are not competitive in the political process. I cannot think of a single member in Kanawha County over the years of 20-some years where we've had single-member districts, and that's 4. There's 1 in Charleston and then 3 in the northern part of the county, that have ever been, there has never been an incumbent defeated in a primary or a general election. Now, it was pointed out that these folks, some of them do a really good job, and that's absolutely true, and that's fair to recognize as well. But across the state, you'll see non-competition in single-member districts. So whenever we look at the numbers, I think maybe we can understand that it's pure politics unless there is a commitment, number one, to limit terms, number two, to have a districting commission that can make sure that when we talk about how one man, one vote applies, how transparent this is, how fair and equitable, and how people get one vote, one person, that in fact what we're going to produce is a better result and not just pure politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
John from 27th, Delegate Schott, to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most of the concerns about the bill, I think, have been adequately addressed. But as the person who's entrusted to chair the Judiciary Committee of this House, I'm always concerned when I hear challenges based on our state constitution to a piece of legislation. So, with all due respect to my colleague and a friend from the 51st, I would suggest to you that if you read Articles 6 and 7 of the Constitution, you're going to find a lot of language in there that's actually obsolete. Our first redistricting is in there. There's a lot of information in there that if we were to literally apply every provision in that section, we would be back to where we were when this state was created. But more importantly, I believe that Articles 6 and 7 of our Constitution were basically supplanted by the United States Supreme Court case of Reynolds versus Sims, which has been mentioned here earlier as first articulating from that court the one person, one vote rule. If there's any suggestion at all that this bill instructs us to do something other than what the Constitution requires, I would suggest you just look at the last 6 words of the bill itself, which reads, with apportionment to meet constitutional standards. So in other words, if we deviate from that in any way, from the constitutional standards expressed in Reynolds v. Sims or later cases, we will be challenged in court because we haven't complied with our own statute. And let me just return to the language of that decision of Reynolds v. Sims, where the court says, so that one person's voting power ought to be roughly equivalent to another person's within the state. And I would suggest to you, you could replace the term voting power with the word influence, so that one person's influence would be substantially equivalent to another person's influence within the state. Now, the argument's been made that multi-member districts, when they operate efficiently and when they work together, have substantially more influence than a single-member district. And I would suggest to you, if really we want to be pure in our motives, if we want to be pure in our motives and follow the standards set by the Supreme Court, we ought to vote for every person's influence in this body to have the same weight. And Mr. Speaker, I urge a passage of the bill.
Question before the House is the passage of the bill. Those in favor of passage will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 72 ayes, 25 nays, 3 members absent, not voting. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk, please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4002.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk, please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Further bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4013, clarifying venue in West Virginia state courts as it applies to non-residents of the state.
Question for the House is the passage of the bill. Gentleman from the 33rd, Doug Hanshaw, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, let me briefly address the non-lawyers in the body. In every lawsuit, there are 2 threshold barriers that have to be crossed before the lawsuit goes forward. Those are jurisdiction and venue. Jurisdiction means that the court in which the lawsuit's filed has to actually have the power to hear the case. It has to have authority to hear cases of that type, and it has to have authority to hear cases involving that plaintiff and that defendant. The second threshold is what's called venue, and that is the court in which the lawsuit's filed a proper place for that case to be brought? And it's the second of those barriers, the venue provision, that brings us to House Bill 4013, or more properly, committee substitute for House Bill 4013. The bill before us provides that after July the 1st, 2018, in other words, July the 1st of this year, non-residents Non-residents of the state of West Virginia may only file lawsuits in West Virginia in two circumstances. The first is where the entity being sued, the person or entity being sued, is actually a West Virginia entity or a West Virginia resident. Or secondly, that a substantial portion of the events or omissions that gave rise to the cause of action in the underlying lawsuit happened here in West Virginia. The provisions of the bill provide that if a lawsuit's filed that doesn't conform to the requirements of this bill, the circuit court shall dismiss that action with prejudice, without prejudice, which means that the plaintiff may go file that lawsuit in a court that does have proper venue. And lastly, it provides a savings clause which makes it clear that no one loses his or her ultimate right to litigate a case, because in circumstances where the plaintiff is unable to get proper jurisdiction over the defendants in any other state or federal court where the action actually arose, then the courts of West Virginia remain open for that purpose. This is a bill designed to speed up relief for West Virginia plaintiffs and defendants by making sure that our courts aren't clogged up by suits filed by non-resident entities. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of the bill.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is the passage of the bill. Those in favor of passage will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Clerk, prepare the machine. Has each member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 95 ayes, 0 nays, 5 members absent not voting. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk, please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4013.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk, please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Further bills on third reading.
House Bill 4026, exempting cashiers from licensure under the Larry W. Border Pharmacy Practice Act.
Question for the House is the passage of the bill. Gentleman from the 27th Delegate Ellington to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill exempts cashiers from licensure under the Pharmacy Practice Act. Currently, when a person works behind the pharmacy counter and they are in contact with an individual handling drugs, scheduled drugs, on that point of sale, they are required to obtain licensure under this particular law. This bill exempts them from doing that. Currently, they would have to be either a pharmacist, pharmacy tech, or intern to be able to hand off the medication. So this bill also does allow for the pharmacy to conduct a background check on those individuals if they so choose so. Mr. Speaker, I do urge passage of the bill.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question for the House is the passage of the bill. Those in favor of passage will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 94 ayes, 2 nays, 4 members absent not voting. Majority of members present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk, please report the title.
House Bill 4026.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. For what purpose, gentleman from the 42nd Delegate Amber, seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, at the appropriate time, I'd like to have a order to introduction, please.
If the gentleman will just wait just a moment, we get through the county. Clerk, please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2028 relating to the venue for suits and other actions against the state.
Are there amendments? Not to bill engrossed and advance to third reading. Bills on first reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2607 extending the maximum period of confinement a judge may impose for certain first-time probationary violations.
Bill be advanced.
House Bill 2822 allowing honorably discharged veterans who possess certain military ratings to qualify to take an examination for licensing as a plumber, electrician, and sprinkler fitter.
Bill be advanced.
House Bill 2838 allowing military veterans who meet certain qualifications to qualify for examination for license as an emergency medical technician.
Bill be advanced. Gentleman from the 42nd asks unanimous consent to the House return to the second order of business for purpose of introduction. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Gentleman from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have with us on behalf of Delegate Campbell and myself from the 42nd, a retired educator who turned that hat in from education to public service. We have with us in the North Gallery the Mayor of Ronceverte, West Virginia, Mr. David Smith. Will the House please make him feel welcome?
Gentleman from 17th, Delegate Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Cabell County delegation, I'd like to recognize the Honorable Mayor Chris Tatum of the City of Barbersville. If he'd stand to be recognized in North Gallery. Thank you.
Further inductions. Leaves of absence. Gentleman from the 58th.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. For our colleagues, Delegates Dean, C. Romine, and Storch.
Without objection, leaves will be granted. Marks by members of the House. The gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Moy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you all for your attention today. For years, our public employees, teachers, service personnel, and public folks works for DOH and DHHR, they work for low wages, typically low wages. That's not a secret to any of us, but they had decent benefits. That made it worthwhile to them. That gave them the incentive to stay in their jobs and work for lower wages in our state. They've had no pay increases for a long time, and we have seen drastic reductions in the benefits that they receive. A few years ago, there were changes made to the retirement system, which was not in favor of the employees. And now we see the erosion of PEIA. I don't know what you guys did this weekend, but I spent a lot of it on the phone talking to my constituents and answering emails, hundreds of emails. Most of these emails were personal in nature. They weren't form emails. 95 to 98% of them were personal, telling me about how these changes are affecting them. These people are crying out for help. They're hurting. They're hurting. They need us to pay attention. I'm going to tell you about just a few that I talked to personally, and I won't take forever today to relate their complete story, but you'll get the message. I talked to a principal, has 2 daughters, both have childhood diabetes. The changes in PEIA have made it pretty much a non-functional insurance for him and his children. So he signed up on CHIPS, which does help with that. But now, because of what's going on in the federal government, he's concerned. Will CHIPS be there for him? Now, this is a school principal that is having trouble making ends meet because of health care issues and the concerns that he has. He just wants to take care of his family. He just wants his daughters to have good care. I talked to a teacher. She's a single mother. She also has a daughter that has childhood diabetes. She relayed to me pretty much the same story. She was pleading with me, Ricky, I want to stay in this state. I want to live and work here. But you're making it unaffordable for me to be able to do that. My daughter needs health care. I can't afford it. And she's working another job too, trying to help support her family. PEIA is critical to them. I talked to a retiree. It's been retired 20 years. Typically, the formula is that if you're on a fixed income, you lose 3% of your purchasing power each year. This gentleman worked for the state, retired, has been retired 20 years. So if that formula holds true, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't, he's lost 60% of his buying power. No one here is talking about COLAs or helping these folks out, but yet their benefits under PEIA are going up and up to the point that they can't even afford to live now. Now let's go to a friend of mine, John. He called and talked to me. His wife works. His insurance premiums are going to go from around about $160 some a month to over $500 because his wife works. He is considering quitting work because it will be cheaper for him not to work. The lack of us fixing PEIA may have more than one unintended consequence, and that being it's easier for folks not to work because of the expense. I don't think anyone here wants that to happen. We want our people working. We don't want to incentivize them not working, but yet that's what these increases seem to do. Now let's go to, I said that, Go 365. Boy, have I ever had an earful over Go 365 and how intrusive it is, the questions that are asked, the things that they're wanting to know, and you've just got to wonder where that come from. You might see something like that in a three-ring circus. Go 365. We're asking our folks to get online, play video games, go buy a Fitbit, tell them how many miles you walk or how many steps you walk. Well, how does that fare for the person that is really sick and can't even walk? Maybe the person that doesn't have internet access. How's that going to help them out? They're just left out in the cold. They're going to end up paying the higher copays and higher deductibles. Most of our folks work. That's what they want to do. That's what we want them to do. They don't have time to get on the computer and play goofy games. I'm just baffled by Go 365, how invasive it is and how ridiculous the things we are asking for folks to be covered by PEIA. I'm going to give you just a little bit of history, and I'll be short with it. About 3 years ago, the minority party, the Democrats, we championed an effort to find a funding source, dedicate it to PEIA, and fix PEIA going forward. We were unable to get a majority of this body to agree that that was a problem. I think that we were probably ahead of our time. We were looking at what Director Cheatham had told us to expect from PEIA, that these problems were coming, and indeed they have. And we were trying to find a resolution to them before our people started hurting. That didn't happen. And here we are. And guess what, folks? Next year, there's going to be another $50 million shift of benefits that will either be taken away from our people on PEIA, reduction in benefits, or raises in what they have to pay. Another $50 million. This year marks $70 million shift. Next year will be another $50 million. So, with that said, I want you to know I am committed to looking at this issue and fixing it. We have to take it seriously. We don't want our teachers leaving. Read your emails, personal accounts of folks saying, listen, I can't do this anymore. We're not getting high pay. The 1% pay raise, by and large, you'll see that most of them aren't even interested in that. They want PEIA fixed. I'm committed to working with you, to looking for solutions. PEIA needs a dedicated funding source so that we're not dealing with this every year. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
John from 26, Dr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most of my comments, the delegate from the 29th talked about. Primarily, I wanted to talk to you about Go 365, how intrusive it actually is. I have a dear friend in the hospital. He's a West Virginian, but he's down in Pikeville, Kentucky. I tried to call the other night, and I asked actually a couple of things, and one of the things that I asked was one of the questions that is asked of you on the Go 365, and immediately I was told it was against the HIPAA laws. So even though I had his pen and his permission to discuss his illness, the lady said I can't do that. So anyway, but the delegate from the 29th, I think, did it most admirably. Secondly, I'd like to, with a heavy heart, announce the passing of a former delegate from McDowell County. Delegate Emily Yeager lost her battle with her health Saturday night. I would ask that the body remember her with a moment of silence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If all of our guests would join the members in rising for a moment of silence in memory of Delegate Yeager. Members may be seated. John from 16th, Delegate Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to make a couple of brief comments about the bill that we discussed, House Bill 4002. Through those remarks, I took notes on a lot of different things. I will tell you that I belong to a multi-member district. And I will also tell you that every year I've run, I've always increased my vote total, and I've done quite well. And if you haven't noticed, I am dark-skinned, and I am the best-looking Sean in this body. Roll call. But to that point, I was back and forth on that, whether single member or whether multi-member. And I think there's valid arguments on each side. But I do not like the fact that on this bill, all of a sudden in this body, I feel like we're worried about equal opportunity and diversity and making sure that we're erasing anything that has a hint of Jim Crow laws. I find that very intriguing, but I applaud that. And if we're going to take that route on that bill, make sure we do it with everything else. Make sure when we have other legislation that's not on the agenda, not on the account, that we get it brought up. Because I was thinking like, we've got it, we finally got it. We're talking about disparity and diversity and all those good things. So if you're truly serious about those things, don't just do it when it's politically expedient. Please do not do that. And if there is ever someone that is, again, I got to brag on my district because we do really well down my way, but if there's a block of people that are not voting for someone, we're talking about, gender, but color and those types of things, if somebody's not going to vote for me because of the way I look, we need to start reaching to their hearts and maybe get them to a church or something. Because that's absolutely disgusting that we're even talking about to give somebody a chance because there will be more people that look like them. No, we need to really make sure they really love the Lord like they say they do. Because if you're not going to vote for somebody for that reason, you can't get upstairs, can't get there. So I just want to remind you all, do not talk about those things to make your political marks. Do them out of sincerity and genuineness. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 55th, Delegate Spinato.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I make unanimous consent that the remarks made by the gentleman from the 29th, 26th, and 16th all be printed in the appendix of the journal. And while I'm up here, I will just ask that all the remarks made by the members on House Bill 4002 also be printed in the appendix of the journal.
Without objection, remarks stated by the gentleman from the 55th will be printed in the appendix of the journal. Further remarks by members of the House. Miscellaneous business. Gentleman from the 58th.
Mr. Speaker, subject to announcements, I move the House adjourn until 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Other announcements. Gentleman from the 35th, Delegate Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance shall continue its budget hearings this afternoon with the Department of Health and Human Resources. We shall convene at 2:15, and if the House Finance Republican members would meet in the chairman's office at 2 p.m. Thank you.
John from 33rd, Delegate Hanshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Judiciary Committee will resume our posted agenda upstairs at 2:15. Thank you.
John from the 51st, Delegate Statler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Education will meet today at 3 p.m. in the Education Committee room. The agenda is posted. Also, your Committee on Firemen and EMS will meet today at 5 p.m. in room 215E, the House Gov org, and agenda is posted.
Lady from 49th, Delegate Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Health and Human Resources will meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. in room 215E. The agenda is posted. The Republican members will caucus at 1:30 tomorrow in the chairman's office. Thank you.
Lady from the 32nd, Delegate Kessinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on the Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse will meet tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. in the Government Organization Committee room.
Gentleman from the 48th, Delegate Hamrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Roads and Transportation, originally scheduled for 1 p.m., will now meet at 2 p.m. in House Government Organization Committee Room 215E. And also, a reminder that your Committee on Government Organization will meet today at 4 p.m. in the House Government Organization Committee Room.
The gentleman from the 33rd, Delegate Hanshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to back that Judiciary Committee meeting up till 2:30. We'll give the other committees a chance to have a little more time. The Judiciary Committee will meet at 2:30 instead of 2:15.
John from the 42nd, Delegate Ambler.
Speaker, thank you. Your Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resource will meet Tuesday, that's tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. in the House Gov org room, and the agenda will be posted.
John from the 24th, Delegate Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we have co-caucus down in GovOrg. Not only will coal keep you warm, but we'll feed you too. Come on down.
Lady from the 50th, Delegate Longstreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Democratic members of the Health Committee will meet in room 252 right after the floor session for a few minutes. Thank you.
John from 34th, Delegate Boggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Democrat members of the Finance Committee will meet at 2 p.m. in my office in room 258M. Thank you.
Further announcements. Request for the House is the motion by the gentleman from the 58th that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. All in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Declare the House adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.